What does pledging allegiance really mean?
I pledge allegiance.
It's more than just words. It's taking responsibility. It's getting involved in our democracy.
This is what democracy looks like.
I'm Allison Daskell-Hausman, and this is The Pledge. It's a podcast profiling people who have pledged to engage in our democracy.
If we're going to have a future, we got to do something about it now. We can't keep putting it off and saying, somebody will take care of it. You know, it's too late to worry about it tomorrow. We got to do something now.
Listen to The Pledge. Be inspired and get involved.
Liberty and justice for all.
The personal is political. This is an old and powerful concept introduced in the 60s by feminists and student activists. I first learned about it as a women's studies major in college. It was an idea I wrestled with. What were the politics of my own story? Was it political, how I felt about my body, how I thought about my career, who I chose to sleep with, and where to live? When I stopped to think about my life, my choices, my opinions, even choosing to produce this podcast, I'm struck by just how political I am and always have been, even before I started getting involved with elections. The personal is also political for Nancy Deabler.
Now, people tell me I'm not scared of the devil.
Nancy is an education administrator. She's been fighting to improve education for children in Alabama in one way or another since the 1970s. For Nancy, political engagement is a daily practice. Speaking her mind is a political act.
I have the reputation here in Montgomery of being the question answerer, or asker. It's not a question I'm not afraid to ask. So sometimes that does get me in trouble because some of the leaders and the presidents of boards and owners of businesses, wish I'd be quiet and don't ask that extra question. But, I believe in being an investigator and knowing what's going on.
Nancy is fueled by her Christian faith and her worries.
In Alabama, we're known for being number one in poor schools, number one in infant mortality. All the bad things we're number one in. So if you look at Alabama statistically, we're sort of the cesspool of society.
The numbers bounce around from year to year, but recent statistics show Alabama schools ranked in the bottom 10. And last year, Alabama and Mississippi had the highest rate of infant mortality in the country. Those statistics, and a lot of other things about Alabama, bother Nancy.
This will probably horrify you. In Alabama, tattoo parlors get inspected by health officials. Daycare centers do not get inspected by the health department. Tattoo parlors get more attention from the government than a daycare center does. And any church or any religious group that wants to can open a daycare center, and they are not under the auspices of any governmental agency. They can do whatever they want to, feed the children whatever they want to, have them laying in filth, mice, rodents, anything. It doesn't matter.
Nancy also worries about Alabama's approach to school discipline.
I think discipline is far more important than beating children with a stick or a belt.
Alabama is one of the 15 states that has a law permitting corporal punishment in public schools.
Knowing that we're from a state that has the highest incarceration rate in America, that goes right back to our school discipline. You just beat people and beat them again until they're out of sight, until they drop out of school.
In Alabama, more than 1 out of every 100 people is incarcerated. It has one of the highest incarceration rates in the country, and that statistic gets much worse when you focus on race. Data from the U.S. Department of Education shows that Black children were more than 3 times as likely as white children to get suspended, expelled, referred to law enforcement, or arrested in school.
It's unreal sometimes to look at how bad Alabama is statistically. church. They started building in 1951.
I met Nancy in the Delrida United Methodist Church in Montgomery.
Came here in 2006.
Oh, those are the tiles.
And they're kind of like, they remind me of the Pennsylvania Dutch things. That
They
I've never
do.
been to Pennsylvania. But
It's
I've
where
seen
her husband had
pictures
been a
of
minister, and he's now retired. Before coming to Alabama, I thought that all white Christians in the South were politically conservative. Nancy tells me most are, but there are also people like her who adamantly connect their faith to progressive values and policies, from supporting immigrants to gay rights to advocating for women's reproductive rights. But most progressives keep pretty quiet about it.
Don't be ashamed to say that you're a Democrat. And see, that's part of the problem. Nobody wants to talk about it because we're predominantly Republican here. If you're white in Montgomery, chances are you're a Republican. I mean, that's the truth. That's the way it is.
During the primaries last year, even the poll workers gave Nancy a hard time because of her political affiliation.
When my husband and I went in to vote, when we were in line, the poll worker looked up and saw us and handed us a Republican ballot. And I handed it back to him. And I said, I would like a Democratic ballot. And he looked at me so funny. And he said, are you sure? And I said, yes, sir, I'm sure. And then he looked at my husband and he said, don't tell me you want one too.
He did want one too. Nancy's husband decided to become a minister 10 years after they were married. Once he became a leader of the church, he and Nancy had to be careful not to mix their politics with their religion.
I couldn't be real visible because I didn't want to affect my husband's career, but I can get on the phone and call people and encourage them to vote.
So that's what Nancy did. She rocked the vote during John Kerry's campaign and President Obama's.
I did it more from an education standpoint to encourage people to vote and to become active because people don't realize that, the democratic process depends on voters. It doesn't depend on strong politicians, it depends on the voters.
During Doug Jones's campaign for U.S. Senate, Nancy decided she needed to do more. Her husband was retired by then, so she hit the streets.
I went out in some of the black neighborhoods where some of my co-workers and former teachers and former social workers lived and just walked around and said, where do you think we need to go? And so many of them said, well, I didn't go vote for Hillary because we were sure she was going to win and we just didn't go. We just go. And I heard that story, I bet you 100 times. They didn't go vote because they were sure Hillary was going to win. And I said, so what did we end up with? The devil incarnate.
Nancy was outspoken even as a child. She grew up in the 60s in the Alabama textile town of Lynette on the Georgia border.
That was a very turbulent time and a very strong political time.
Alabama didn't start to integrate its schools until nearly a decade after the U.S. Supreme Court ruled school segregation was unconstitutional.
At that time, George Wallace, I'm sure you've heard of him, he sort of turned Alabama upside down politically.
I draw the line in the dust and toss the gauntlet before the feet of tyranny, and I say segregation now, segregation tomorrow, and segregation forever.
Wallace was determined to keep Alabama schools segregated despite federal law. But by the time Nancy reached the 6th grade, her school finally started the process of integration. The superintendent and the principal were members of the same Methodist church as Nancy's family. They knew her family supported integration, so they asked her parents if Nancy could be what they called a goodwill ambassador for integration. Her parents agreed.
So it was my job to go to the black schools in Lynette and invite them to come to some of our events and to invite them to be part of the integration.
Nancy says the schools seemed similar to her, but there were some differences she noticed even as a child.
Our library was much bigger than the library there. We had far more bookcases and more colorful displays of books. than there. That was the main thing that I noticed. And their auditorium was not near as nice as ours. Their stage didn't have the theatrical draping and the drops and the staging that we had at our school.
Nancy says she remembers how kind people were to her in the black school. But the white kids she knew weren't as nice.
Oh, I was called the N-word, N-lover, several times. And my parents had comments made to them. Why did they want me over there stirring up trouble in the black community? And, my parents would just say, she's doing what Christ calls us to do.
Nancy says she tried to teach her own children Christian-based progressive values like her parents taught her. Her son, Ben, is a talent agent in New York City. He's also a devout Christian.
I'm very active in my church here, and I go to a very progressive church, a very successful church full of, a lot of millionaires who are, very, very successful, very progressive, and love Jesus. And, the way that we look at it is everything that was taught by Jesus is very progressive in support of loving all. And every single thing that's used by quote-unquote conservative Christians is not the words of Jesus.
Ben says his mom's politics have always surprised people.
It shocks people when, they hear like these progressive ideals and she makes it sound so simple. And she's like, well, of course I believe in this. Or of course I support this. Of course I think gay people should be married. Or of course I'm not going to vote for this child molester. These things that are just like, that seems so incredibly simple. And a lot of that's definitely, linked with her religion.
Ben says he's learned a lot from his mom about how to live a political life.
With her politics, it's not about certain activities or actions. It's the way she lives her life. She lives to serve others and champion for the people that have less. She never turns that off, and I don't think she ever will.
When Nancy mentioned her children to me, she said she had a 30-year-old son and a 23-year-old daughter. It wasn't until I reached out to Ben for an interview that I learned that he wasn't Nancy's biological son. He joined Nancy's family when he was nearly 18. That was when his parents kicked him out. He said his biological family was very conservative and it made him uncomfortable.
I never felt right about the things that were being said and the actions that were being taken. And then when I met the Deablers, I was like, oh man, this makes so much sense.
The Deablers took Ben in, and he says they showed him love in ways his biological family never did.
For me to have this second chance and for it to be unquestionable love, and for me to, when they had moved to a new church or a new community, this is our son, and there's no reason for an explanation. There's really no way to describe that feeling besides, just knowing how lucky I am.
Nancy is matter-of-fact about her civic engagement. She does what she knows is the right thing to do, the Christian thing to do. For her, the personal is political, and the political is personal, which means the things that Donald Trump says and does bother her deeply.
This is real. This is not a reality show that we can turn the volume down or turn the TV off and it'll go away. He's there, and our future is very much at stake.
And Nancy doesn't have much faith that her generation can solve this crisis. But even though the world seems more volatile now than ever before, Nancy says she still has hope.
Those youngsters down in Parkland, Florida, were able to put together that march, and that they've raised millions and millions of dollars to support them in their efforts to tell our legislators and our senators they better do something. Because all the people in my age bracket have not been able to get their attention to say, hey, we want things changed.
Nancy knows that changing Alabama is going to be really hard, and it can't wait.
So we need to get people to rally up and say, if we're going to have a future, we got to do something about it now. We can't keep putting it off and saying, somebody will take care of it. Let's don't worry about it today. Like in the movie Gone with the Wind, we'll worry about that tomorrow. It's too late to worry about tomorrow. We got to do something now.
Ben was right when he said that Nancy is a woman who surprises people. She presents as a fine Southern white lady, and she is a fine Southern white lady. But she is fierce in her beliefs about racial equity and taking action now to prepare for the future. Thank you, Nancy, for sharing your story with me, and thank you, Ben, for talking to me about your mom. Our next episode, and the final one for this first season of The Pledge, will feature Mary S. Wilson. Since Mary was a child, she's been told to keep her opinions to herself. But now, she's in her 70s, and let's just say, things have changed.
I'm angry. I'm not scared. As a matter of fact, I just dare them to slay me, because then I'll get to file assault charges. And I will. I won't stop.
You've been listening to The Pledge. Please be sure to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts and share it with all your friends. Also, if you have a story about political engagement or a friend who inspires you, we want to hear it. You can record a voice memo on your phone and email it to thepledgepodcast@gmail.com. You can also go to our website at thepledgepodcast.com or to our Facebook page to share your story. And thanks for all the suggestions coming in. We have some very compelling ideas that we're considering for Season 2. We are just starting to uncover the extraordinary ways Americans pledge to our country. We need your help. Until next time, stay strong and stick with your pledge.